What's going on, Red Rocks Church? Can I be one of the first to say to you, Happy New Year. It's been an amazing year. God has done so much in our church and through our church in 2023. But like always, we're still saying that we ain't seen nothing yet and God is just getting started. That's why at the end of every year, we like to look back on the year and reflect on what He's already done so that we can look ahead to the new year with greater faith and greater expectancy for what He's going to do. So I hope that you're on your favorite couch right now, maybe wearing your baggiest, comfiest sweatpants, drinking some coffee and eating some blueberry pancakes. But wherever you are and whoever you are, I pray today is a day of rest. And I want to challenge you to lean into this moment with us and let's look back and reflect together. So Red Rocks, welcome to Red Rocks Wrapped.
Here we go. We made it. 2023. Wrapped. Let's go.
This year started with the Future You series. And somebody asked recently what your favorite series of the entire year was, and for me it was the Future You. That meant a lot to me. Honestly, it was that series and a few specific messages in it that changed what 2023 would be for me. And specifically talking about the future you will not be a mystery, but the future you will actually make complete sense. In other words, who you are by the end of this year will just simply be the sum total of all of your decisions and all of your thoughts and all of your prayers. You will get to where you're going to one step at a time. And I had an honest moment at the start of this year during that series where I kind of took an honest projection into the future and assessed it a little bit and said, if I continue all of my patterns and all of my decisions and all of my habits a year from now, or better yet, like 10 years from now, who will I be? And I could see clearly who I would be. And I just knew there's a few things I'm not gonna like unless I change something right now. And so never have we done a series that caused, a lot of times we preach from things that we've been going through already, but that series was sort of a wake-up call to me of, I feel like I'm kind of preaching to a church, but really I'm preaching to myself. Yeah. I am the one who needs to hear these messages more than anybody else.
Yeah, I think the tone that started at the beginning of the year kind of stopped everybody in their tracks to that question of who am I gonna be? Because I get a say in this whole thing. This year doesn't have to happen to me.
Right.
I have a choice in how I go about it. And for me, I sat the first couple weeks of the year, we had just had a baby, and so I was actually home, not at the church, watching you guys preach Future You, dreaming of the future, and also up through the night holding a baby. And
you were on your paternity leave vacation, right?
Paternity leave vacation.
Cool
vacation. It was very nice vacation, very restful. But I had a lot of moments of just sitting there holding Ray and thinking about the year in our church and seeing almost like my first time zooming out from our church since we planted it.
Yeah.
Having this zoomed out perspective of our church and of our role to preach and series and things you guys were talking about, and thinking about for our church, what is the future church? What do we want it to look like at the end of this year? And I just felt very clearly if there was a word that I heard, it was clarity. Clarity of the gospel. Thinking about how confusing of a time we live in, how confusing of a culture so many of our people are living in, that people need to come and they need to hear a razor sharp gospel. And I think the year kind of felt that way, that every single series, every single sermon was trying to communicate as clearly as possible who Jesus is, that He's all that you need. And then I found myself at the bottom rung of a ladder later in the year in the Alive and Free series. And it was almost like I knew this picture right here is kind of like a defining picture for my confrontation I feel like God had with me of the gospel this year of, you want to preach this so clearly to people that my grace is sufficient for them, and yet so much of your life you're living out of this fear that you're only kept around because you're a necessity person, not that you're a chosen person.
Right.
And so I've worked really hard in ministry, and I think this year, even having to start the year where I couldn't do anything, I was just at home while the church was happening and kicking off and growing like crazy, realizing that God has chosen me not because of what I've done, but what I do gets to be this outpouring of his love. And it's cool for me reflecting back on this year, starting with that series, starting with that word of there needs to be clarity of the gospel in this church, and realizing I needed that clarity of the gospel in my life. That led me to the bottom of a ladder to find out just what God wanted to speak to me of him choosing me for who I am, and resonating with other people and the insecurities that we all carry and the fears that we carry and the things that drive us to live out of that. And so the connection through our series this year, I think of that clarity has been a huge memory for me.
Well, speaking of fears, aren't you afraid of heights? So
And I
you
am
sat on top of a ladder, man.
Yes, I don't love heights, and I went up there and I felt different after.
Wow.
I also love how you said it was in January when you were gone. The church grew like crazy.
Yeah.
I remember a couple weeks in May and June when I was gone and the church grew. I feel like that's such a thing God does with the three of us.
Yeah.
It's when one person's truly resting. It's almost like God goes, I'm gonna do more in that season, just to remind you that this has nothing to do with you, and it's me doing all of it.
That's so good. One of the best moments was in November when all three of us were gone. It was the first time in the history of our church that all three of us have been gone. We were in Colorado with our small group. And Sunday morning rolls around and our phones are just blowing up with pictures of overflow on overflow on overflow. And it was like one of the biggest.
The largest weeks outside of Easter and baptism.
So good, man. I love that. It's this constant reminder that God's got this, that God's gonna do this. To me, all of that kind of culminated in the Alive and Free series this fall. I don't know, we went like 10 weeks on it, 11 weeks or so, and we did that on purpose because that really was all of the work and all of the clarity and all of the future use stuff that we put in the beginning of 2023, to me, was leading up to the fall, where it really felt like God was saying, hey, it's time you can actually live alive and free. This isn't just some hypothetical thing that maybe you'll step into in the future. This can be your reality today. And I think you went first in that with the addiction sermon and leading the way for the church in that. But for me, the comparison sermon that I did is the one that stuck out to me the most, where I got so much good feedback after that. Comparison's one of those things where you feel like you're the only one that gets stuck in that comparison trap. And then you start talking about it and you realize, oh, actually that's everybody. Everybody struggles with the comparison trap, and that's one of those ways that the enemy just seems to hold us down. And so I'm just so proud of our church, man. I'm so proud of everybody that stepped up and said, no, I'm actually not just going to talk about living alive and free. I'm actually going to experience this abundant life that Jesus says he came to bring us.
I feel like I noticed a shift based off feedback after sermons, and a lot of times people don't quite know what to say, so it's like, good job, like it was a public speaking class or something. But I love when the conversations are like, hey, I needed to hear that scripture, I needed God to speak to me in this way because this thing in my life has to go. And it's actually like a response out of this. It's not like, hey, good job on your speech. It's like, hey, God's speaking to me through worship, through a sermon, through this church, that I can live alive and free. And hearing people's stories, which when I see like this baptism footage up here of a day like that, and you hear the stories of people, and it just never gets old, because you're realizing that this isn't like we come to a self-help class or like a place to talk about theory. This is really truly being invited to be alive and free, where we see life change happen, and every single one of these people is a story that has all of the fears and all of the comparison and the addictions and the insecurities and all the things that the enemy has thrown at us. And yet you see these people triumphant and victorious coming out of the water, and the witness that they are to the power of God. And it changes how you view church. And that's why I love when people show up for the first time on a baptism weekend because they realize like this isn't like a social club.
Right.
This is a movement by the Holy Spirit that can't be explained without God behind it.
And everybody's experiencing the same God.
Yeah.
And it's undeniable.
Yeah.
We joke a lot like this is not a concert and this is not a TED Talk.
Yeah.
If you want a motivational speech, there are so many better venues for those things.
Yeah.
If God's not in this, then all this is a TED Talk and Christian karaoke, and it's just really weird. And there's way better things you could do on your Sunday morning or your Saturday evening.
Totally.
But people showing up and everybody encountering the exact same God in an undeniable way shows the power.
There was a moment there, you had just finished your sermon.
Yeah.
And Ethan, we were starting to baptize people. And Katie, one of our volunteers, came over, and it felt like we were like winding down, and she came over and she said, "We have 33 more." And we had one of those moments.
Did you say
like,
3?
33 more. And I look back at Emily and her band, and they're all just like smile on their face, like, this is what it's all about. We're gonna figure out. We're just gonna play every song that we know.
Yeah.
I think that service must have been like 2 hours long.
Yeah, I remember thinking, guys, hurry up these baptisms. Stop making it so special for everybody. We got to get cars out of the parking lot, man.
Yeah.
Let's go.
Yeah. But people stuck around, man.
I was like, is revival about to break out? Is this thing about to go
yeah.
on for 2 weeks? I don't know.
It's cool when you're in the tub with somebody. I feel like that's the most special moments I get to have as a pastor, is being the other person in the tub.
Yeah.
Because you get to ask them, like, everybody has their story. And then there's some people who just decided 5 minutes ago, this is my moment. God just spoke to me right now, and you get to ask them, why are you in this tub right now? And to hear people who are hearing the voice of God, hearing him call them to a new life with him, hearing them to proclaim their faith, there's nothing like that. And a weekend like this, think about Easter weekend, where people talk about Austin as this place where nobody goes to church. Nobody wants to know Jesus.
Yeah.
And we had overflow in every part of our building.
It was wild.
And it was like surreal. It's not people coming for a show. Like they have some idea that they're showing up to hear about the resurrection.
That's like,
of Jesus.
our lobby is big.
It's just packed.
And to have it packed out like that, that's
That guy's sitting in an office chair.
We started to have to pull that's
homeroom. So that's overflow of overflow.
Sitting on tables.
Upstairs.
And then that's overflow of the overflow of the overflow.
That's when we started, and we just had a TV up there that Andrew put up on a stand, and we just broadcast from YouTube.
Couldn't have been a good experience.
No, there's people,
People were just there.
This picture right here, this was like probably the most joyful moment of the year. We had to go, and hopefully our landlords will forgive us, but we had to take beanbags out of one of their storage rooms because we literally ran out of chairs.
There was one guy, he's kind of hard to see, but in the bottom right of that photo, he's wearing a blue shirt, and he sat there in the back corner of the third overflow up in our offices and watched church on a TV, a 65-inch TV from like 100 feet away, sitting in a mini kid's chair, and raised his hand to give his life to Jesus that morning.
In a kid's chair.
In a kid's chair.
So good.
And I feel like, man, those are the stories. That's why we do what we do. That's like, there's nothing better.
Yeah.
If you could have shown us pictures like that when we were driving to Austin 5.5 years ago, leaving everything to start this church, and said, this guy 5 years from now in a kid's chair in the overflow of the overflow of the overflow on Easter morning is going to give his life to Jesus.
Yeah.
That's why you're driving. That's why you're moving.
Yeah. There's like this beautiful pairing this year, I feel like, between these crazy moments where the building is bursting at the seams, and they're paired. I feel like God has paired them with these humbling moments of us constantly being reminded, and everyone being reminded, like, this isn't about any one person.
Right.
No.
This is not on your shoulders. Like, all you have to do is present the gospel.
Yeah.
And floods of people will come.
Yeah.
Because it's the truth that they're looking for.
So
And this
good,
year,
man.
I think, just with the clarity of the gospel, the amount of people who were showing up with all these crazy backstories and constantly being reminded, this has nothing to do with you. You get to play a part in this, but this is just what happens when people hear about Jesus. It's just remarkable. Like, seeing all these photos, it's just surreal, but at the same time, kind of not that surprising. When you've experienced the goodness of God, then you're kind of like, no wonder flocks of people show up, right? That's what happened with Jesus, is people were just coming out of the woodwork to go hang out with him and hear him speak and stand somewhere, sit on a beanbag, so they could hear what he had to say.
Yeah, we went through 2 Timothy in May or June.
June.
And I remember
Yeah.
getting to the end of it. Oh, it was your birthdays. Sorry, happy birthdays, guys.
Thank you, man.
Thanks, Ryan. Yeah.
Week 4, I taught through chapter 4, which is Paul's last words that we have from him. It's his final letter, final chapter, the final letter. And it struck me as I was preaching. I named the sermon "A Jacket and a Journal." And I was thinking about how, like, so often throughout history, when a king or somebody famous or whatever dies, they would be buried with all this gold, and this whole like monument would be made for them. And when Paul gets to the end of his life, he's writing to Timothy going, hey, if you make it, could you bring my jacket with you and that journal so that I can like keep writing a little bit. And I had one of those moments. It's such a random verse in the Bible, but it was sticking out to me all week. And then as I was up there preaching it, I remember it sinking in for me in the moment where I realized like exactly what we're saying. A guy will get saved on a kid's chair in the overflow of the overflow of the overflow. And it has very little to do with what we do. It has everything to do with what God is going to do through us. Mm-hmm. And so it's this like beautiful invitation to surrender and to stop like, man, holding on so tight to things like reputation, stop holding on so tight to things like how am I going to be remembered and what do people think of me and all of that. Let all of that go. Because Paul, by the end of his life, was just like, I don't care about any of that stuff. And like that stuff doesn't matter to me. All that matters to me is that Jesus' name is made famous. Yeah. And so if you're gonna bury me with a bunch of gold, don't do that. Use that gold to go plant more churches. Like what are we doing, you know?
Yeah.
And it's surreal watching it because I feel like it's one of those lessons that you know, and then you have a moment where like the truth sinks down another level into your heart. And that was one of those moments for me. I feel like the whole year, man, it was an invitation to surrender.
I feel like we dug some deep roots as a church this year. Like I'm proud of our church for series like 2 Timothy, series like Pendulum, you know, kicking it off, talking about some of the biggest topics, predestination and Calvinism and all that kind of stuff. And a church that's like, we're here for it. Let's sit in tension and let's have hard conversations and let's seek the mysteries of God and let's, you know, learn and grow in our faith. You guys taught a class, you know, this year and just people like crazy showing up. To dive deeper into.
All throughout the month of August, we taught
Brainstorm.
a class called Brainstorm on Wednesday night. On Wednesday night, there's no video, there's no music, there's just two guys teaching mental health and the Bible for 90 minutes, and like 400 to 500 people for 4 Wednesday nights in a row showed up and took notes for the whole thing and didn't want to leave. Like people stuck around. I'm like, you guys are here for class. And it shows how hungry people are.
I was going to say, I feel like that's one of the words that would describe this year is hungry.
Hungry.
I feel like we're a hungry church, that we want more than what the world's giving us. We want more than what's, you know, culture's telling us. We want the real thing. And people will show up on a Wednesday night to get the real thing. People will sit on a beanbag to get the real thing. Like, there's a hunger.
To not just read, you have not been given a spirit of fear, but of power, love, and a sound mind. Not just read that, but go, oh, if that's actually true, then I want to start living in that. Like, I want to start taking the steps that I need to take to actually walk around with a sound mind.
To me, the greatest picture of hunger is usually when you see men and women who were part of Red Rocks at GBB, literally behind bars, and then they're out of prison and they come to church for the first time. They sit on the front row, and they amen even the parts of the sermon that suck. And they, you know,
it's so great.
Even if the worship.
That never happens.
Yeah. Not at Red Rocks.
Hypothetically speaking.
And they will, you know, if something's off during worship, they don't care. They're gonna raise their hands, and that's called hunger. But it makes sense for that person who just got out of prison. But what you're starting to see is that same kind of hunger in the person who's working a 9-to-5 job, who's making $80,000 a year, who has a pretty content and comfortable life. That person is amening those same parts and raising their hands in that part of the song. Like and showing up on Wednesday evenings for a class. There is a deep hunger in this generation of Christians.
That just reminds me of a cool moment this year when we were baptizing people. This guy got in the tub and I just asked him, like, what led you here? Why are you getting baptized right now? And he said, I just got out of prison. And I've been in for some years and I got a new life now and I got to start it on the right foot. And that's my faith in Jesus that leads me. And it was like this unashamed, relentless faith that he just couldn't help himself but get in there. But he wasn't, the cool thing, like you were just saying, he wasn't the only person like that.
Yeah.
Right, like you said, he was like this great catalyst, but all these other people that were coming in from different walks of life and different backstories had that hunger and that drive to just say, I've heard the gospel and this is what it has to be about for me. This is where I'm going.
Yeah, it's like the narrative of the world, it's becoming more and more clear that it's just not working. Mm-hmm. And so as people keep trying it and it keeps not working, we're at a point where it's like we don't have to twist anyone's arm into hearing this truth. People are just so thirsty or hungry for the truth that they just want to hear it.
Yeah.
And that's like, oh man, in the middle of all the craziness that's happening, that is a really cool silver lining.
Yeah.
To what's going on, to what God is up to right now.
Yeah,
in the world.
absolutely.
He's making himself known in a really beautiful way.
So to me, what God's been saying all year is get ready, get ready, get ready. And I remember over a year ago feeling like I'm not like a prophetic dreams guy at night and I wake up and the Holy Spirit was just speaking to me all night. I wish I was, but I do feel like God gives me visions. I'm a vision guy, and over a year ago, got that word get ready. And it was sort of based out of Joshua when he says, consecrate yourselves today, get ready today, for tomorrow I'm gonna do amazing things. And so I was thinking, all right, God's about to do amazing things in our church. And absolutely, all 2023, God did amazing things. But I also sense a depth of our church in 2023 getting ready for what God's about to do. I have no idea what that is. I'm leaving the outcome to him and the amazing things that he chooses to do. He always writes better stories than we do. I remember that drug of choice sermon and being honest to the entire church about pain medication dependency because of chronic head pain and this medication that worked. It was like the only thing that worked, but it also started to become my vice. And then the Future You series back in January, where I realized this has to be the year. And then back in March, stopped and went cold turkey and made so many changes this year. It was truly the finishing of an old chapter that I had read one too many times, and then the beginning of a new chapter by the end of this year. And this sermon, getting to be honest with the church, I have never gotten feedback like I've gotten after this message. And I was nervous to give that.
Sure.
I remember calling Sean and saying, Sean, how honest should I be? And he said, well, we value authenticity. It's so easy for pastors to be brutally honest about struggles from 15 years ago.
Right.
And the worse, the better.
Yeah, right.
15 years ago.
Yeah, if it was then.
Yeah, because look at all God has done since then.
Right.
But to be open and honest about, well, what about this year? And it was like a release and an exhale from so many people who went, okay, like I'm not that alone in my struggles. And I feel like for me this year was marked by God going, where this church is going, that habit that you have, this dependency, that can't come. And you need to leave it here, because if you bring it with you, the next chapter, the next season will crush you.
Yeah, that's right.
Because the faith that got you here, I'm requiring a new kind of faith for what's about to come. For sure. So consecrate yourselves today, for tomorrow I'm gonna do amazing things among you.
I've watched you preach sermons, Doug, for over a decade, and like preach the house down and string together all these amazing, just like you always do.
Oh,
just
keep
like
talking.
It's so good, it's so
for
profound. But I've never been more proud of you than watching you preach that drug of choice sermon.
Thanks,
it
man.
It was a different level of authenticity, a different level of vulnerability that you've moved into, and it was like I could sense it in the room. There was something happening beyond just the amazing words that were being said. There were walls being broken down in the spiritual realm. That it was just the power of the Holy Spirit working through you, which we all know will just happen when we're just ready to be ourselves and be vulnerable. Right. But it's so hard to get there. Yeah. And so watching you lead the way, I just felt like the whole church was going, you just gave us all permission slips to be vulnerable and be authentic. So I feel like you were leading the charge in that, which will happen into 2024. So
thank you. Yeah, thank you for saying that. I feel like every time you're about to be honest to a new level from stage in a sermon, you feel like I'm going to give them reasons to not trust me as one of their leaders and pastors, but it does the opposite. It gives them more reasons to trust you. Because everybody's imperfect and everybody's flawed. And even the best preacher in the world who will never preach from a single weakness, you're still sitting in that chair listening going, I know that you're messed up though.
You're human.
Why won't you be human on stage? You know, we don't need you to, we need you to be above reproach, but we don't need you to wear a cape. We already have a savior.
Yeah, not to be a broken record, but I think that comes back to the clarity of the gospel. When you're just on track with that, you're not asking somebody to put their trust in you. You're showing them what it looks like to put your trust in Jesus. And when people are guided to that, then they're not looking to another human being, whether it's their pastor, their group leader, their friend, or whatever, to be everything for them. They find who Jesus is and realize I can trust him, and I can walk with all these imperfect people on this journey together. And that's like seeing so much of this footage of our church and people that are just having so much fun and like the community aspect of it. I just feel like a lot of kids growing up, they don't want to have friends over to their house because they're embarrassed of their family. And I feel the opposite about our church. That I'm just like, I want all my friends to come here and be a part of this crew from like events, like we have for our volunteers and just such ridiculous things that we do, and weekends like this family coming together. I love, and I think this year just continued to build on the culture of fun that we have as a church, for our volunteers, for our groups, for just coming together on weekends. Ridiculous things that we do, funny things that we do, not taking ourselves too seriously as we take God very seriously. That there's this joy and this culture of fun in our church, that people will show up on a Friday night to a tailgate party and enjoy themselves, just getting to be with a family that you're proud to be a part of, because nobody's trying to put on a show. We're not trying to be perfect and act like we are. We've all embraced, we need Jesus.
The joy of the Lord is our strength, and people need to laugh now more than ever. So we'll never apologize for making stupid jokes. Or like in our podcast, the Afterthoughts podcast.
Shout out.
By the way, which
here it is.
Oh, come on.
The Afterthoughts podcast.
We did an episode recently where we green screened me on the moon. The entire episode.
One of my favorite moments for us as a church ever.
And we talked about serious things, and still it was green screen me on the moon. I remember showing that to Will and Kinsley, and they were convinced. They were convinced. Even still, they're like, Dad went to the moon to film that. They're positive I was on the moon, even though you could kind of see like you guys in the shot with your microphones, and obviously I'm talking face to face with you, but they believe with every cell in their body that I'm on the moon in that shot.
So good.
I think the podcast for me was such a fun project to finally get to green light. And for two different reasons. One, for the depth and ability for us to talk deeper into sermons. I think a lot of people give the feedback of like, well, I didn't get enough out of that sermon. It's like, well, the point isn't that this sermon feeds you for the whole week. In the hope that people will go and continue to pursue God in their personal lives, but to be able to give more to it on the depth side, but then also just have a lot of fun. I've gotten feedback from people that are like, it feels like you guys kind of just laugh for the first 10, 20 minutes. You make jokes this isn't what I expect from a pastor's podcast, from a church podcast, which is exactly our hope behind it, And when I see the footage of kids and youth and the next generation that we have up here, thinking of my own kids, thinking of your kids watching you on the moon and stuff, I love the fact that they're growing up in a church family that can have fun doing it and look forward to being at church. My wife was just telling me a story of a family who started coming to church, and their kids have buddies in our sensory room and going into their rooms, and the mom was like shocked. Like, for the first time, my kids asked to go to church. Because of the amazing volunteers that we have and the amazing services that are put on for these kids, that this next generation gets to experience the depth and the importance of the gospel, but also the fun that it is to walk with Jesus in a community of people walking with you.
My 3-year-old Kinsley woke up on Saturday, and the first thing she said to me was, Daddy, we're going to church today.
Come on.
That's awesome.
She was so excited to wake up. and get to church. So as a dad, obviously I'm so grateful. All of our amazing volunteers.
Look at these kids.
So awesome.
Amazing.
It's so good.
But it's shocking to me
Yeah.
to see teenagers that just go out of their way to show up at church. It's just wild. That just wasn't me as a teenager.
I love what's happening in our youth ministry. So our good friend, Eric, he's got 4 kids who are all in that age bracket. And I remember the first time I went to lunch with him earlier this year, and he was like, I had to talk to you and see what's going on, because my 17-year-old is getting up on Sunday and driving 35 minutes to church without his mom and dad making him.
Yeah.
That's not, a teenager shouldn't be doing that. But my kids,
what the heck?
My kids are doing that every single weekend. And so we had to come check this thing out. We had to get to know you guys and see what's happening here. A lot of times on Sunday mornings, I will, I'll go into the parking lot and,
it's a nightmare. I had to leave early and try to get out of that mess after 11
Shout out to everybody.
Everybody. I stand with Rod.
Here you are live in the parking lot.
I stand with Rod and Maddie and the rest of our parking team and get some vitamin D, but then also get to wave to all the cars and all the people driving in. But it's cool because every single one of those cars is showing up with a different story. Some of them driving, some of them are teenagers driving from 35 minutes away.
Yeah.
And every single one of those cars has a different reason for choosing to come to church that day. Of everything else, like everybody's busy.
Yeah.
And all of those cars choose to drive to Red Rocks Church that day to spend an hour and 10 minutes, an hour and 15 minutes if I'm preaching. With God in this amazing community.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
I think when we talk about like traffic jams, adding services, overflow, like, sometimes when people ask like, how's the church? I never want to sound like I'm bragging, because our church is growing and there's so many amazing stories of life change, but I am bragging on God. You know, I the people that know us know this isn't us. This isn't because of people. Like, it just shows you there's so many other things that a teenager could be doing on a weekend. And that are more entertaining or whatever than going to a church service at Red Rocks. But the power of God and people getting to experience Him.
Yeah, when you try to explain it to one of your friends who has no church experience at all, and you tell them like, oh yeah, so like all these people are showing up and most of them spend like 30 minutes in the parking lot just trying to get to a spot. The response is always like, they do?
Why?
Like, why? There's football on Sundays. Why are they doing this? And it's like, besides from the reality that we really do have a creator who is crazy about us and who has a plan and purpose for our lives, like I can't really explain it. So come check it out.
I had during baptism weekend in November, I had a moment where I was in the tub and Ethan, our intern for youth, came over and he had a youth student, his buddies who brought him to church in the first place, his high school buddies, and the kid's parents were there too. And they had similarly, like they came to church like, my son suddenly loves going to church. We need to see what is he a part of? Like, is he telling me the truth that he's going to a church? And seeing the look of pride in his high school buddies' eyes at their friend who had realized the gospel was true for him. Seeing the wonder in his parents' eyes that their teenage kid, who could be out doing a variety of things, is publicly proclaiming his faith in front of a whole bunch of church people. It was just like the wonder of the gospel for me, getting to see it in moments like that. And the way that God creatively reaches to people. I'm thinking back to the latter sermon as I was, walking through this journey through the year of realizing the truth that God has chosen me, just because I'm His kid. I walked out of that sermon and I felt changed and hoped that it resonated with other people. And I was recently talking to this woman who's been coming to our church, and her story was that she had gone to a sauna and was on like a media fast for herself. And kind of like when it came to faith and stuff, kind of not sure where she was at. And she went into the sauna and was like, well, I'm just gonna sit in here, so I'll give myself a break and watch something. And in the TV, in the sauna, the person before her that was in there was watching that sermon And it just happened to be the thing on the TV, and she was like, okay, well, I'll just watch this because it seems like maybe it's something positive.
It was on the TV.
And it was on the TV in a sauna that she had just walked into and watched this, and it was so cool, like humbling for me to realize I'm not the only person that feels this way, and I'm not the only person that needed to learn this lesson from God. And now she comes to church all because she just showed up to a sauna. And we have story after story after story of all these people, and I love asking, how did you get here? There are so many creative ways that I've seen God reach to people, and every church has these stories to tell. We just have our own of these creative ways that God will find somebody. Well, I always feel really proud of our church for days like this, all these work projects and things people go to do in our city outside of our four walls. Like we say a lot, if we were to disappear as a church in a day, we would hope that our city would notice, that they would feel the loss of Red Rocks Church because we're actually making an impact in our city. And I just feel proud to be a part of a family of people that will go out in the middle of the summer and
we just picked the hottest month of the year.
Terrible timing. But throw a party for
why don't we do
kids.
it in October? Let's keep doing it in July. Yeah.
Test people.
Uh-huh.
But to see
Suffering for the gospel.
I think that's why, like, one of my favorite sermons of the year is when I get to give, like, the business report. And people are like, that's not what I expected for a church sermon to be. But get to just share the amount of impact we get to have. Like, we have all these stories in the room that you see on a baptism Sunday, that you see on an Easter Sunday. You've got a teenage kid in a baptism pool. You've got a guy sitting on a kid's chair in the back of an upstairs overflow at an Easter service. And then you have people that we won't know, or we won't know the impact of their story, but we get to be a part of showcasing the kingdom and who God is to them through how we serve our city and love our city and all the way to the ends of the earth. And that for me is always going to be the heartbeat of our church, that we're going to come together and worship and see God change our lives, but it's going to be for a bigger purpose to go change the world. And I feel like 2023 was a year where we could proudly say, like, we changed the world for people. We got to be a part of changing the world here and on the other side of it. And that doesn't happen because of a few people that are passionate. That happens because of a family, like an army of people that go, no, we're living on purpose to go change the world.
You know, the thing that moved me the most of all the different organizations and pastors and missionaries that we partner with all over the world was our church paid for the Gospel of Luke to be translated into a language of an unreached people group. So for the very first time, they have access to the Word of God. They have Luke. And that just, I teared up the first time I heard that, because how cool is that, first of all, that this people who has never had access to Scripture now has Luke. And then also I was like, man, how much do I take for granted the fact that I have the entire Bible in my backpack and on my phone right now? And what they would do, like they would do anything just for Luke, give me Luke. And that was one of the coolest things I think we've gotten to do this year.
I was thinking about that over Christmas because we all preach from Luke 2. And that story, and how, like, when you're trying to write a sermon, sometimes you get in your own head and you start overthinking it all, and then you feel bad for yourself and all that. And then you stop and think, like, hold on a second. We have the Bible at our fingertips and the opportunity to go preach the good news and proclaim the good news publicly.
But you want to quit preaching because you don't have enough good jokes in your sermon?
Like, without any fear of real persecution. You know, it's such a humbling thing. Man,
I feel like that was you had that idea though, which was, I think, the perfect way to end the year, walking into the Christmas season, of do not be afraid, which spoke so much to this whole year of sound mind, of brainstorm, of all these kind of things, that themes of the year of, hey, we don't have to live in fear, like fight fear with fear, all this kind of do not be afraid language that we had this year. I bring you good news, which was the clarity of the gospel that will bring great joy to all people, and we get to see that great joy and smiling volunteers and you know, volunteer parties and all these amazing things that we get to do, throwing parties for kids in our city, and seeing the joy that it is for people to share that news, to live a life that's not in this fear, unhealthy fear, but instead with this joy of sharing the gospel. And it was, to me, the perfect way to wrap it up, and just continues to get me more excited, because as our church gets more crowded and more people show up, that just means there's more people that we get to send back out into Austin and beyond to go share that great news and bring that great joy to all kinds of people from all walks of life, like all the stories that we have to tell. Looking back at 2023, I think the story for me was the story of one of our volunteers, Jocelyn. I got a text that she was fighting for her life, suddenly was in the hospital. I didn't know exactly what had happened. And I remember it was a Thursday night, got another text, hey, her group's gonna go up to the hospital to pray. If you're available, come pray with us. And I drove up to that hospital not knowing what to expect, knowing that her life was hanging in the balance. And I'm thankful that what started as one of the scariest moments, the scariest moment of the year for me, has turned into the story of the year. And that Jocelyn, who is a walking miracle, is here and can tell us the story herself as we look back on 2023.
Welcome, Jocelyn.
Hi. So I've had type 1 diabetes since I was 9. Towards the end of this year, leading up to me being in the hospital, I had gotten to a point where my health even was kind of taking a back seat. I wasn't going to the gym, and that kind of led to just me not prioritizing good blood sugars and taking care of my diabetes. So that led to a high A1C, which is just a measure of the glucose in your blood. And it put me into a hyperglycemic state, which basically just, it jacked up my blood sugars. I ended up fainting, becoming unconscious when I went to go to the bathroom that morning. I think it was 6 a.m. is what the reports showed. And I was down on the ground for 10 hours, so it was 6 to 4 p.m.
Wow.
Yeah, completely unconscious, and they found me between the tub and the toilet, so just completely kind of compressed in that spot. And they had called the full code, which I later learned is essentially like the person's dead or close to dead, and so they full CPR, full everything. At that point, my kidneys were already in failure when they found me. When I went into the hospital, there were some things that like logic and science can't explain. So in terms of just the condition that I was in, my blood pH level was 6.7, which I learned is incompatible with human life. Like, it's not possible. And my potassium level was 9, which is also, at that point you're looking at cardiac arrest, all kinds of stuff with your heart. And then my blood sugar was 1400. So your blood sugar is usually supposed to be about 80 to 140, 130. Yeah. Because I really shouldn't be here. And there's no explanation for it except for having faith and the relationship that I have with God, the relationship that my community has with God, and being surrounded by so many prayer warriors and so many people who were like, okay, everything right now doesn't matter. We're going to the hospital, and we just got to be there.
Yeah. I love a Sunday at church, a Saturday or Sunday at church when we're all together and it's fun and everyone's excited about what God's doing. But for me, walking into that hospital lobby was saying, this is the church in action, is when, not just when we're celebrating the great things in life, but when we are in the darkest moments, the scariest moments, we show up and we believe that we have a God who makes the impossible possible. And you're a walking miracle. Like, you are literally, you shouldn't be here right now. And the power of the testimony, I think it was shocking to people in the hospital that worked there, right? Like, there's so many stories of people.
They're even, like, looking at this picture one, some people I don't even know in this, which is like, just shows how strong and how powerful community is. Remember, there was like one nurse that came in when I was still in the ICU, and she goes, "You have a lot of friends here." And I said, "Yeah." And I said, "They're all just praying for me and just supporting me." And she said, "I have genuinely never seen this many people here." And I told her, I said, "It's just God." Coming out of it, there were some notes. I have, some note cards here. I think
You got a stack of them.
this one was yours.
Yeah.
But I have some note cards in here.
Hold that stack up.
Yeah.
This is how many people at the hospital.
Actually, I couldn't find them all. But it's just,
Wow.
it was insane. But reading these and waking up, I feel like right now I'm kind of looking at life everywhere I go, whether I'm at church or at the grocery store, kind of from like a bird's eye view.
Yeah. To me, that sounds like living more.
Yeah.
Like being present in the moment
Yeah.
and not speeding through life and completely missing it.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
the alive and free is found in like the present
Yeah.
moment, you know?
Yeah.
Presence and perspective. We always joke about like Lazarus, who died, and Jesus raised him from the dead. And it's like, what are you going to say to him now? What's going to stop that guy from telling people about God? And that's what I love about your story is that you've always been a greeter at our church. You've always been like the face for people, to welcome them into our church, to let them know that this is a loving family and you're welcome here. And the church showed up in your moment, you know, and then the next thing you know, you wake up and you're talking about your Bible, you're sharing your faith with people. And we say all the time in theory, hey, what happens in here is it really matters for everybody out there. But this is a real story of that happening. It makes me think of, too, a long time ago at Red Rocks Church, started saying, hey, we're not a country club for the saints. We're a hospital for sinners.
Wow.
And
That's good.
all these people show up to the hospital, and none of us had answers. None of us could heal you. We know our God can. And then there's stories your friends were going to other hospital rooms and praying for other patients and other people. And it was just the church in action. Like, that's how we're supposed to be, is that we see the world that way. That there are all these people who need God. They need his power, they need his healing, they need his love in their life. And we get to go room to room in this giant hospital that we live in for all these broken people. And you were this catalyst in the scariest moment that became this amazing moment of the church in motion. And that's why, for me, when I think back to 2023, I will always remember your story. One, because you're a walking miracle. And two, because I got to see my family, the church, our church, be the church in such a tremendous way. That night, one of your friends was like, hey, we're all going to write notes to Jocelyn. And, I had seen the look in your mom's eye. And I seriously thought, like, I don't know if Jocelyn will ever read this. But I wrote, Jocelyn, I'm sure you will hear this over and over, but wow, are you loved? I've never seen a prayer crowd at a hospital, and I'm not surprised because you are such a lovable human. I'm praying for complete healing in your life by the blood of Jesus. It's everything and all we need. You are a gift to our church family, and I'm so grateful for your life. God holds you as he always has, and I pray for a miracle and one heck of a story to tell. And I didn't know that night that we'd get to sit here and you'd get to tell your story to a church and a whole bunch of other people that need to know the power of our God. So I'm glad you're here.
Yeah, just being able to be here and read the cards and just see everyone that I love and all of that, it's crazy.
Yeah, we talk life and death all the time, but this is it. Like, this was the real thing, and you have a circle of people there praying, knowing ultimately you're good either way, because you have eternity because of Jesus. And Paul says to live as Christ, to die as gain. And in a way, it kind of sucks for you that you came back here, but it's so good for us and for the church and for the world that needs to hear your story and then watch what God does through your life. And from here, I can't imagine the amount of lives you're going to reach and people you'll be able to say, hey, I'm not telling you the power of my God in theory. I can show it to you through my life and the miracle that he did.
Yeah, I'm unapologetically and boldly just so filled with faith. My middle name is Faith. I'm serious. And the struggle that we go through, there's a reason, it has to kind of take its course, and to be able to see the good news and see blessing from that, you just have to be patient. You have to trust God, and you have to just keep showing up for yourself, for God, and for the people around you too, because you're also, every one of us, working on our faith, we're a testimony to other people. So
I have to imagine your purpose tank between the start of 2023 and the end of 2023 is like, now, I don't know what it was before, but it's got to be overflowing now. Understanding, like, God's got a story he's writing through you.
Yeah.
Like Ethan said in that card, you'll have one heck of a story to tell, and it's not done.
Oh, it's definitely,
So thank you for being here and sharing with us. Yeah.
That was awesome.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for letting us into your homes. We're out here filming this outro, and it's starting to pour rain on us. But you know what, Red Rocks? That's just how much we love you. I wanted to say thanks for joining us. And I also wanted to invite you to church next weekend, January 6th and January 7th, because first of all, we're turning 5 as a church. And so happy birthday to you, happy birthday to me. Come to church and celebrate with us. But then also the second reason is because we are kicking off a brand new teaching series to start the whole year. And the teaching series is called The Story You'll Tell. By the end of 2024, what will be the story you'll tell? Let's define that on purpose so we can live next year by design and not by default. So that's what we're talking about. please be our guest. Come to church. Saturday evening, we have 4 and 6 p.m. And then Sunday morning is 8:30, 10:15, and noon. Tell all of your friends. And then on Monday, January 8th, we are starting 21 days of prayer and fasting as a church. This is now a tradition that we do every single year. And if you've got questions, they're all going to be answered at church next weekend. And if you can't wait until then, download the Red Rocks Church app or go to redrocksaustin.com for more information. But we will see you next week. We love you. Happy New Year.